Hello and welcome to a new episode of Diversity, Social Justice and Inclusion. Today's topic is the German debate about a leading culture. In the next minutes, I will explain what a leading culture is and whether Germany needs one or not. My name is Eiko Saathoff and I will be your host today. Since around 20 years, there is a recurrent discussion in Germany about the so-called Leitkultur. The debate reached its peak when in 2017 the German politician Thomas de Maizière published an article including 10 points which for him are part of the German leading culture. The points contain, for example, the handshake as the typical German greeting and the recognition and internalization of German history. With his statement, "We are not Burka," he fueled the discussion. Especially in times of large migration, the need for integration became intensively important over the last decade, and therefore also the question, what is German? The term Leitkultur, leading culture, states the dominant culture within a certain area, so in our case, Germany. The leading culture can either be based on local heritage or the one practiced by the majority. The question discussed in this podcast is whether Germany needs a leading culture or not. Therefore, I will state arguments for and against this assertion. Pro-arguments. The most common argument for a leading culture is that migrants need a cultural framework to adapt to. Based on the assumption that peaceful togetherness is only possible in a homogenic society, people expect outsiders to assimilate to the local culture. And to make integration easier, a leading culture is needed to communicate German values, tradition, and beliefs to the newcomers. Obviously, life in Germany can be very different to what migrants are used to in their home countries. By metaphorically handing over a leading culture guide, migrants can prepare themselves and prevent cultural clashes. This should lead to higher integration and less parallel societies where migrants only live in a sphere of their kind. A second argument in this debate is the conservation of German culture. People fear that through multiculturalism and diversity, particles of German culture stand in competition with other cultures. Through globalization, cultural fragments like food, language, or traditional events change or just disappear. Therefore, organizations like the Verein Deutsche Sprache, like Club for German Language, get found. The goal of this club is to obtain the German language and protect it, for example, against Anglicisms and gendering. Culture is a high good and needs to be protected and conserved, so that also following generations can be part of it. Contra-arguments. The first argument against a certain leading culture is the tendency of discrimination. By pointing out one culture as being the ultimate and the one everybody has to adapt to, you oppress the others. Saying, "This is our Leitkultur," you imply that all other cultures have less value. It creates a multi-class society. You have the real Germans on the one side, and on the other side, the so-called non-Germans, people who do not follow the Leitkultur. If de Maizière then says that Germany is not Burka, women who wear burqas are not part of the Leitkultur. This thinking might trigger people who hardly identify with the German culture to discriminate those people. Migrants then only have the two options between assimilating to the Leitkultur and occasionally give up particles of their own culture, or living the circumstance that the society might not accept them. So the question is, does a Leitkultur contribute to a strong national spirit, or does it even the opposite and splits the society? Secondly, let's imagine the German government really wants to follow the idea of creating a Leitkultur framework. The first question appearing would be, what is even German? How do we define our culture? Pretty quickly, you will come to the conclusion that it's not that easy to define the German stereotype. Germany is a federal state, meaning that it is divided into 16 sovereign, so-called Bundesländer, federal states. The states have a lot of power in certain political areas, like education, culture, or police. But next to that, they differentiate from each other by their culture. There are immense differences between the north and the south, west and east, and even neighbor states sometimes show tremendous differences. In the one part, Carnival is part of DNA. In the other parts, people hate it. South Germans are being stigmatized as chatterboxes, while North Germans, like me, are perceived as uncommunicative. Even language is a huge aspect. Around 20 dialects are currently spoken throughout Germany, and in their roughest form it is nearly impossible to understand for outsiders. I, for example, speak Plattdeutsch, flat German, a tongue commonly spoken around the North and the East Sea. If I would visit Lena from my course in Bavaria, South Germany, I wouldn't understand a word of what she was telling her parents. Through German history, most inhabitants do identify more with their region than Germany as a whole. Local patriotism is way more common than national patriotism. Conclusion: how do you want to have a common German Leitkultur if Germany in itself is so diverse and debates about what to include and exclude would take forever? Lastly, the most upbrought point by supporters of a Leitkultur is that migrants should not only adapt to German language and tradition, but also to its values. The goal behind this attempt is to prevent the execution of questionable behavior like the oppression of women, child beating, or anti-Semitism. Especially conservatives often link these very behaviors to migrants from the Middle East and Africa. People argue that Germany is built upon liberal and Christian values, including equality, open-mindedness, and self-determination. All those values are written down in the German constitution. Starting with the first article, it says, Die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar. The human dignity is untouchable. That already implies everything. It implies that nobody should be oppressed based on gender, race, nationality, or religion, and it also implies that nobody is allowed to harm another. So what is a Leitkultur needed for if we have a code of conduct for German values and beliefs written down in the legislation? Conclusion. As I reach the end of this episode, I want to give my personal view on the upbrought arguments. In my opinion, integration is important, and it should be in the interest of both the government and the migrant to run as smoothly as possible. I think a kind of guide through which the newcomers get some impressions on how life in Germany looks like and what to be aware of is a nice idea. But I think this should be informal and regional. As explained above, it is hard to define what German is, so integration should be executed individually and locally. In my opinion, a total German Leitkultur cannot be observed, and also culture is very flexible. What might be typical German today can already be irrelevant for the next generation. Additionally, I want to point out the argument of discrimination. By defining what is German, you exclude everybody who does not share the culture. By stating Germany is not burqa, you imply that every woman who does wear a burqa in public cannot be part of the German society. In my opinion, this statement is unethical and against the human right of religion. Actually, arguing this is the exact opposite of what people are calling out to be German. The discussion about a certain Leitkultur recalled slightly the National Socialistic attempt of a homogenic Germany back in the 1940s. A Leitkultur is not very far away from the ideology of a superior race, as the Nazis called it 80 years ago. For me, Germany is a cosmopolitan country, and everything you need to do to be part of society is adhering to the rules written down in the Constitution. If so, everybody is welcome, no matter if you pray to Jesus or Allah, wear burqa or hot pants, or eat baklava instead of bratwurst. Thank you very much for listening. For more details on this topic and exclusive information on the research for this podcast, please read my article, The German Leitkultur Debate, on Elo or Microsoft Teams. See you next time, and goodbye.